Dice Roll Podcast. This is episode 21, and we have Lee here, and Ed,
Aye.
and Richard,
Oh, hi.
and I'm Jeff.
Oh, nice. You changed up the order this time. I like that.
Did I?
Yeah,
Yes.
you sure did.
So today we're looking to talk a bit about the new Fate Core that's reached its final release, at least in the electronic version. That spent a bunch of time on Kickstarter, and I think they're looking to get their stuff out, at least the basic versions of the main book.
Yeah, they have the electronic one, and then they have the fairy one.
What?
It's called FAE. What is it? Fate Accelerated Electronic Edition. FAE. Get it? FAE fairies.
Accelerated
This joke-
Electronic Edition. What does that mean, by the way?
It's like a quick start sort of thing. I think it's only like 90
Oh.
pages.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a thing. I have not read it because I've still been mostly browsing and perusing the sweet images and
Nice.
and text editing that they've done on the newest actual book.
Yeah, I
so-
really like this city that's floating and it has a hairy bottom. It's really cool.
Oh, so we could call that city like Richardania?
Yeah, it'd be factually accurate.
Does the art remind anyone else of D20 Modern?
It really
Yes.
does.
Yeah.
The just in general, yeah.
The
I think
cyborg
that-
gorilla does it for me, I think.
That is something I associate with,
I thought-
with D20 Modern.
And I might just be imagining it, but wasn't there a gorilla featured prominently on the cover of the old core game, Spirit of the Century? I never played it, but it was like one of the first
I
real
never
Fatey
looked at it.
games that Evil Hat Company produced. Yeah, and I think it was a gorilla on a biplane. I might be misremembering that.
That sort of syncs up with the Spirit of the Century that I have in my brain,
Whereas
but I don't know if
this-
that's true.
This book much more prominently features a partly mechanized gorilla fighting with possibly mechanized ninjas.
I see nothing wrong with that.
No, I like that they're not trying to cleave to normal in any meaningful way.
No, not even remotely. Honestly, though, just in general, there is, I'd say, noticeably more art
Yeah.
than the last edition of the book. Like in the first 20 pages, I saw two images that I didn't recognize, and it doesn't feel like it's like maybe it's. I mean, on my screen, of course, it's ridiculous, but I bet in my hands, I bet the like the art to page ratio, like art to text on the pages, seems pretty good.
For
Most
one,
of the time.
I have the electronic version. Now that we've been talking about it, I'm pretty sure that I don't have the final electronic version. I think I just have one of the pre-release slash
go up.
playtest versions.
Right.
But I hadn't been planning on getting the physical copy of this book. Have any of you invested to actually get the hard copy?
No, I had the digital one.
Okay. This is the first book the first role-playing game book I think that I'm really kind of okay with that. Like, I feel like they really did format it very well, even though it's not like the wide page format. I think that it just looks fine. There isn't too much noise on each page, and the text is a decent size that you can just read it off of the screen without a lot of problem.
Yeah.
It's all very clean.
Yeah.
I have it set to 100%, which I don't usually like on the in the mage books and that sort of thing. I do not typically set the zoom to 100%,
Sure.
just because the things tend to be kind of weirdly small and text wise, and also the font that they use in there is I don't like it most of the time.
Okay, well,
So I guess for anyone who doesn't know what Fate is, a short description might be in order. It's one of the major RPGs that's been gaining popularity recently, and it's all about player GM collaboration and having basically your character concept be the core mechanic behind the game, and just sort of going from there into whatever wild or not so wild adventure you want.
Yeah.
I'm
Sorry.
not to bore anyone with more history lessons, but I'm pretty sure the Fate system was first developed for the Evil Hat Productions game Spirit of the Century, and then they revamped it heavily for licensed Dresden Files role-playing game, and then they took those revamps and carried them way on to the next level for basically just a generic core system, which works for basically everything.
Yeah, there's nothing, like there isn't a particular setting that I could think that this wouldn't work in. Somebody on Reddit today was talking, or maybe not today, maybe a few days ago, was talking about adapting the Vancium magic like from D&D and trying to get like a similar style or a feel, and like the suggestions in bringing that into Fate, I was like, oh my god, like those are really good suggestions, and like those that seems to me like when I think about playing it, I'm like that would work really well. It's like instant, very like you can come up with in a pretty short time a way to get a lot of different settings and styles of things to work in it in a way that I think pleases people.
Yeah, I think that the only reservation I have about it is like if you're interested in a specific set of detailed rules for stuff, you might have a hard time constructing those from the ground up to use with Fate or adapting them from something else. But as far as like, just kind of, if you take a setting that doesn't already have a rule system associated with it, it is very easy to just kind of to figure out where everything falls in that setting.
And that's one thing about it. It's very good at just sort of ad hoc. Like there's a whole section in it for extras that just show you how to very simply add superpowers, but they don't have to be like follow any sort of cohesive guideline or work like anyone else's or anything like that. It's all just you stick it in, and eventually they just say if something seems too powerful, they encourage the player not to be a dick if it has to be cut back a bit. Like
it feels really like generic and easy to mold, because there's not like it's not so strict that, and it's just vague enough that you can really kind of do whatever you want with it as long as it blends with the story well, which I think is really all they were really concerned about when they put it together.
When I first saw this, and I was only going based on what they had already produced for Dresden Files, I was kind of uncomfortable just because the Dresden Files role-playing game has the basic framework, but it also has a very detailed system for supernatural powers and magic. And I was just like, none of that framework is in here, but I think the point is that you're not supposed to necessarily, not everything is going to have that same feel. And I think that the rules they constructed for Dresden were very appropriate for that feel, but what they're going for here is more of a like, feel it out until you have the feel that you want, but basically this is how it works. And this is how storytelling works in the system. And I think that on paper, it looks extremely good.
Yeah. It's clean. Just in general, I feel like the whole rule set is very... it feels like when I've been reading it a lot lately and, thinking about it and that sort of thing. And when I think about making something, I can have a pretty clear, roadmap of how that thing would get made. And like that, I don't know, the whole style of creating a setting and creating a rules set to go with that, it feels very clean.
They actually, it almost feels like they're daring you to come up with stuff for it. Like they give you like the basics, and then and I don't remember exactly where, but there was certain parts when I was reading different variations of this where they were like, this is like an example of what you could do, and then they would like say, but you should really come up with your own thing, basically. You know what I mean? Like, and this is just a guideline, but you can throw this out the window once you come up with your own stuff. And I really like some of the way that they do examples too. They really walk you through it, in a perspective that really gets you to understand.
They're really good examples.
Yeah, the gameplay examples they're both. I think they're set apart from the text. Like they use clear black line, like thick black lines to indicate when there's a play example happening. and it like they read easily. The whole book reads very easily, and they're like easy to understand. They're all like direct referencing. It's none of the weird vagueness that a lot of that I associate with the World of Darkness books. And I don't know, it's just like considering how much of a departure it is from a lot of like the rules heavy systems that we're sort of used to playing, like World of Darkness and D&D and that sort of thing. It's really nice that they have such clear examples and that sort of thing. Like that, like when I read through rules, it isn't always super easy for me to picture in my head how that's actually gonna, work out. But like they have, clear pictures, clear rules examples and that sort of thing. It works out in such a way that it's easy to understand every section as soon as you're done with it.
Well, they don't just give you an example a lot of times. Like, they could just say, an example for this would be this. But instead, they say, Jimmy would have really liked to do this. And they put it in this perspective of Jimmy. And then, like, walk you through what he was thinking and what he was trying to do and why he didn't do this or that. And, like, give you this really detailed story almost as to how Jimmy got to the conclusion of what he was going to do, rather than just saying, this is the example,
Yeah.
And so it's really nice to have them do that, because it is a storytelling game. So for it to be just black and white rules is one thing, but to actually put a narrative is a whole different thing,
Yeah.
So.
And being a storytelling game is one primary aspect about the game that I don't think could really be gotten around. Like, they mentioned that the game is best used for powerful characters or otherwise capable individuals. It's good for high story, high role playing. But like, if I don't think the game would be very adaptable for something like a dungeon crawl or something like I don't know. I've been in games briefly with other groups where it was like, you get drunk and you go through the dungeon and you share a laugh at the guy rolling a 1 and on the simplest task and failing. Like, I don't think you'd have that sort of experience with Fate.
I partly agree and I partly disagree in that I think that there are a lot of people who, I don't know, there's a lot of different attitudes about dungeon crawl and that sort of gameplay. And I feel like a lot of people, a lot of old-timers will complain that, like, it didn't used to, role-playing games didn't used to feel quite so much like board games. There's a lot more character stuff and that sort of thing going on, even while you were just, like, digging around a cavern or a dungeon or a castle. And I feel like if you were inclined to run a game like that, you could run a very interesting game where the primary action is, like, what the characters are want out of the dungeon crawl and why they're doing it, what interests them in there. Maybe they have conflicting or hazardous motives for that sort of thing. I think you could really get into kind of like a completely different attitude toward that sort of gameplay if you ran something like that in Fate, and you wouldn't necessarily be worried so much about treasure or leveling up, because those things don't really factor in.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, like, you bring up a good, like a core thing about Fate is that there's a whole section in there for game creation, and it's sort of the collaborative game creation process, and the whole idea that you aren't, like, I mean, you can do it the old way where where the GM does everything, and then they sit down and they're like, make characters, and then you put. Like, the people make characters, and then you just sort of put them in the world that the GM.
Yeah, and we all met in a bar somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but like in this, they encourage you to bake character creation and game creation together into a delicious pie. Where the idea is that the intent is to to make a game that everyone actively wants to play. It isn't like. It's hard to make a dungeon crawl that no one wants to play if you all made the game together and made the setting.
If you thought it would make the game fun, you could have an aspect on your character sheet that is, I met the other characters in a bar.
Well, and that's the thing too, is you actually have something, you're already integrated into the story before the world is even created, which I find really interesting too, because I'm kind of used to the traditional either pre-written or DM came up with the story in advance, and you're kind of depending on them to make the setting, but this is like such a collaborative effort, that
Sure.
you have a stake in it just from the get-go, so I find that kind of interesting about it.
It's like in any other game, if you were to think of like, oh, let's get together and make characters, like blowing a session on character creation, especially when you're like really busy, that just seems like it sucks. But I think if this is done well, it's supposed to be just like playing. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah. It isn't a bunch of people sit down with like a big pile of D&D books, which I know I've done with, we're all passing around D&D books trying to figure out what race we're going to play and what class we're going to play, and I enjoy that, but it's very different than this.
Yeah, and I mean, I tried to we'll say D&D or Pathfinder traditional role-playing game. I try to change things up, take some different skills or different feats or different ability score combinations, but in this in Fate it's like, ooh, I mean, you couldn't make even close to the same character twice in a row unless you set out to do it.
Yeah.
Well, not unless the next character that you're making has the exact same backstory as the last character you made.
Yeah, you'd have to try really hard.
Yes.
Like, this is all about, there's a lot of variety in it, in like on a game-to-game basis. I think that's really cool. People are going to be telling really unique stories.
One criticism I would say, and I don't even know if this is really a criticism, but maybe a downside there's a big lack of like crunch and stuff like that.
That's true.
And
Yeah.
that may be good for some. Some people might not like that. But it's sort of that almost D&D 4th-esque Zen-like quality where if every character is different, yet at the same time, every character is kind of exactly the same.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I wonder, that brings up a good point. I wonder if the lack of crunch makes this less friendly for new players, or if it makes it more friendly for new players, because there's less boundaries. So, I mean, you would think, I don't know, for whatever reason I would think, maybe just because of the old way of thinking, but with more rules, it's easier for a new player to get in because they can always fall back on the reality of what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
But with something like this, it's like real open-ended. On the other hand, a new player could do whatever they want and it would be accepted,
I've seen it both ways where like players jump into a game and they just embrace the ultimate creativity and they're, I want to do this, and then the GM's like, well, this is D&D and you don't have a feat for that, and I don't know. I mean, Fate would work perfect for that new player, but like you said, the new player who wants to grasp their surroundings and understand exactly what they can and can't do and the confines of the world as defined by the system, they're going to be confused until they really get how the game is played.
Yeah, those guys should definitely play Burning Wheel. Let them have all the crunch they want.
Yeah, I believe that there are crunchier systems out there, but not too many. I guess I was very concerned about the apparent lack of crunch myself, because I'm not going to say I'm like hobbled and dependent on these on rule systems to enjoy
Even though we all
a game.
know it.
Well, what I'm saying is that it's not that I'm utterly dependent on a rule system to enjoy it. It's that I find rule systems interesting, especially when they support what the game is about. And I feel like the best ones almost always do. And in this, we've already basically established that this system, specifically since it is a core generic system, it isn't really about anything. It's basically just about telling stories about a small group of exceptional characters who are in whatever situation, overcoming some sort of challenges or adversity, and that's about all.
Yeah, it's really hard.
It's up to what you said at the beginning of the game.
It's really hard for them to dictate what the rules are going to be for a setting that hasn't really been created yet by the players.
it's like the cool stuff about your character in this is what happens dynamically, what happens when you
Right.
get to the table. Whereas in between sessions, like in D&D, when you level up, you can, Munch can tweak out that feat and think your character is so awesome because you've got this, 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 and in the right circumstances, you can do this much damage. And it's like,
Yeah.
and that means something within the confines of the world, but you don't get anything like that in Fate. I mean,
I guess one thing I was going to say earlier when we were talking about like you had mentioned that they say the game is designed for like basically powerful / capable characters
Yeah.
where you're already able to do stuff. And I guess what it occurs to me now is we've all had extensive experience with the 3.5 / Pathfinder sweet spot,
yeah.
where
Yeah.
you level up to like 5 or 6, and then everything's golden for like we'll say 6 or 7 levels after that, and then everything starts to kind of come off the rails. Whereas I feel like this game is designed so that by necessity the entirety of gameplay occurs in a sort of sweet spot constructed out of these the fact that aspects are the main drive of the system.
Yeah.
Because your stats, while important, just they only do so much. They only go from so much to so much, and you only get so many points in them. And it's just sort of like basically aspects, and even aspects like temporary ones you just pick up along the way or have applied to a scene. Those are what's really making things happen. And so you're
Yeah, and
you're
just
in the
as
sweet spot.
a quick overview for anyone who, of course, doesn't know about Fate. The primary mechanic of the game is that you have aspects which you basically pick as like short little phrases that describe something about your character, and then you call upon those to gain bonuses, or the GM calls upon those to give you a negative or make you do something or something like that. And those interact with fate points, which is like a Benny type thing. Which goes up and down based on whether you're getting positive results or negative things from your aspects.
And
Yeah.
it's funny too because the aspects almost count as if they were like your ability scores in a way. I mean, they're not like written down like ability scores, but you treat them like this is what you're going to actually use to overcome your obstacles in the game, just as much as using mostly in tandem with, but it feels like you will need those to really do the neat stuff in the game because you're just never going to roll high enough when you really need to,
And that's why two people never have the same character, because who your character is the important part.
Yeah.
Whereas you could have,
Sure.
the maximum skill as firearms in like 3 different characters, and they still seem completely different.
Yeah,
And
I often when I'm like in the Fate thing that we're playing that Jeff's running, I more often than not think of like approach a situation with my aspects in mind more than I approach a situation with my skills in mind. Even though the skills are important clearly because you use them to overcome things.
Yeah, it's still the things that you're good at.
Yeah, but I still like the aspects are the things I consider whenever I'm not rolling a skill basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I kind of feel bad that I don't do that more, and I think part of it is just that like my aspects, so many of them are similar, and we're playing from an older, basically a sort of hybridized version, I think, still.
Yeah.
From when when Fate Core was just kind of launching, and there were still a lot of Dresden Files conceits in the system. So we have a lot of aspects more than the current rules stipulate you should.
Yeah.
And I feel sort of lost a little bit. I think I was very leery about the apparent reduction in the amount of aspects you get, but I'm not so much anymore. I'm more eager to try the new way than I am concerned
Yeah.
about it.
I think that a lower amount of aspects, like I think Fate Core just uses 5, which one of them is a
Right.
troubled aspect. That is to say, it's something that gets your character into trouble regularly or long term. If you're high concept, so if you're like a private investigator, you'll have something related to that specifically. and then you'll have 3 sort of aspects that, change over time, and they, they're a little bit more. I consider them more like short term than your troubled and your high concept more often than not.
That's my biggest concern about the limited number of aspects in Fate Core is that, if you want to pick up something new, you have to get rid of something that you already have on there.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's a high risk of getting set in your ways. You're like, I really don't want to give any of these up, so I'm just gonna not. That's one of the big advancement rewards that you get, is that, the simplest level of advancement you can have is basically you get to switch around one of your aspects or one of your skills, I think.
But that's actually kind of cool also in some way, because you can think of it like, if your aspects never change, then as long as your aspects are done well, as long as they describe your character appropriately, then you realize that your character isn't developing. And then you could be like, wow, I haven't changed these in a while. Maybe I should think of a direction, or I don't know.
Sometimes the story goes in a way where it just feels so organic that you should be changing this aspect, either because, like you can't have an aspect talking about how, great of a gunman you are if, like, say you lost your arms or something. So now it's like you're having to adapt. So if the story changes something that had something to do with one of your aspects, then you're challenged with opening that new opportunity of evolving your character in a different path, and being better at maybe something else now because of what happened in the story.
Maybe you're a good runner.
I agree with what you're saying, but I feel like I can definitely see a situation where it's like I would be happy to switch out an aspect that is a pain in my butt and that is largely resolved within the plot of the game. Like, maybe you have an aspect that you're like constantly being harassed by mobsters, and you just like stick it to the leader of the ones that are haranguing you, and so now they're running scared, and so it's like it's no longer appropriate, so you're going to switch it out. But it's just like, if you have 3 aspects, even if they're 3 aspects that are a pain in your butt every session, I feel like if they're really good and you like them, I feel like it would be kind of tough to cast them aside sometimes. Especially like, what if you had one aspect that you're leaning on? Well, yeah, I'm just saying, like, I'm a little concerned. I feel like once I get my hands really deep into this 5 aspect kind of situation, I will feel more comfortable. But for the time being, I'm just like, that number kind of scares me.
I guess one thing I'm interested from a GM perspective about the 5 is that it's something I think I can keep track of with a certain degree of sanity. Because I can't do 10 for each character. That's just crazy.
Bonkers.
But with like 5, if you could actually like look at the 5 small phrases that describe each character, it's not, I mean, you could give up an aspect and still play your character that way. It's just not the thing that the GM and the other players are going to be really focusing on. So it's like, I want to take my character into this direction and worry about these type of things for a while.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. That also reminds me, like, my other big concern about the game, and this is not meant to be any sort of a black mark on your GMing, but my primary Fate experience comes from that game, which for the audience's benefit is Mage the Awakening game, which has been adapted to the Fate rules loosely at first, and then later much more carefully and
we'll
effectively.
Call it Franken Fate, because it's definitely not any one rule set.
It is between.
It is extremely fun, though. I enjoy it immensely, but it's basically I feel like the Fate point economy, at least up until very recently, had been a little stagnant. I felt like I wasn't getting enough points, and so I was very reluctant to spend them.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I got a whole mess of them, and now I'm like really, really Fate rich, and I'm still kind of reluctant to spend them, which is maybe says something about the way actual economics works, but maybe I'm just blowing smoke. But it's just like I feel rich and powerful, but I'm just like, I don't want to go back down there where I'm spending my 1 point and then waiting for whatever you want me to do to get the next one. Because that's the thing, is like, I almost always take them when you offer them, even when the I'm being compelled to do something distasteful, which it seldom is that distasteful. But it's like, oh, buddy, I want them.
I kind of like being in the danger zone. Like I have this pile of fate points now, and I'm like, I don't feel like I don't know. Like we spent a pretty long time on the low end of the of the fate wealth, and I'm like, now that I have a bunch of them, I'm a little out of my comfort zone now. I'm used to being poor.
And you know, some of the responsibility for that falls on us too, because as I've been finding out when we've been playing like the last couple games, is that we should also be trying to bait Jeff into giving us fate points as well as the way that we're using them to our benefit. And now that I'm realizing that, it's like, oh, okay, well maybe I can try to get the story to seem better if I put it like in Jeff's lap that this is how I want it. I can get a fate point that way because I used a butt ton of them in the last thing that we did, and it's like I'm gonna have to like keep finding clever ways to hey, I can get a fate point for that, right? You know, like trying to, but that's all part of what this is about too, because it's making the story collaboratively with the GM. So
and you can do that with the other players too.
Yeah, like, exactly.
I mean, part of fate is that, you know, for everyone else is that you can also, you know, suggest or compel other people's aspects.
And we don't see that enough.
You can, like, nudge that, you know. And I think that part of it is that I can only remember one aspect, maybe, from each person. And that's kind of pushing it.
I want to have them like written down in a place that everyone can see. Like, I think it would be really
a lot. And
of
with
this,
5 players, you'd have 50 of them, and that's a lot.
A lot of it, Frank, harkens back to Franken-Game. It's it's still a bit more like games I used to run where there's you know, the players are involved, the players are forging their own path, but they're not as integrated into literally everything as is probably intended by Fate.
Yeah.
Right.
And that would make it a lot easier to think of more compels, to really get into just spitefully compelling each other. Like, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, you know, I thought of
sorry, go on.
Oh, I was gonna say I thought of something else too when Ed was talking about I guess his skepticism of it going from such a large amount of aspects down to like 5. But I don't know if this is mentioned in the Fate Core book or not, but it seems like it's okay to tag things that are just facts about your character based on like things that are happening in the game too. So it's one thing to have like, you know, 5 that are maybe more like personality type of aspects, but then when it's like you have a specific job or, you know, something that you're wearing or whatever could also be something that can be tagged as well. So I think just using those like scene aspects and things like that in a clever way or a clever fashion also helps. You know, you don't have to be defined by so many things, you know, so I don't know, I can kind of see it. If you could just pick like 5 things that are like your real core, you know, values or whatever, that makes sense to me.
I think the scene aspects are like, you could, I'm willing to bet that somewhere in the history of role-playing games, somebody has made a game where it's basically just, you know, like, let's all describe what's happening in the scene, assign a point value to it, and roll dice. And it's basically like you're basically taking an aspect from wherever you find it, rolling and adding whatever modifier is appropriate to, let's say, if it's a skill. You know, like, you can really pluck aspects out of anywhere. Generally speaking, if you're like doing it under some stress, you have to maybe make a skill roll to discover the aspect or gain advantage over it for yourself. But outside of the situation, it's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna, I don't know, you're describing tools, I'm thinking of different tool situations, but yeah, it's like you can, scene aspects really just pop up whenever you ask them to.
From a creative perspective, just to kind of describe a bit what scene aspects and all that stuff means, is one of their ideas behind the game, one of their core concepts is that basically everything can be treated as though it's a character. So characters have aspects, but if you want to make a scene come to life, you can give a scene an aspect. If you want to have an overarching theme for your game, you can give your game an aspect. You know, if you want a place or a piece of equipment or NPCs or whatever, everything can just be kind of given an aspect to be given life, and then people can interact with it in a mechanical way.
Right, use them to their advantage or whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think one of my challenges personally for embracing the Fate system, and this has largely come out of the conversion of Mage to the Fate system, especially your latest revision, which you have not yet inflicted on us, which is basically Fate Core with Mage stuff integrated into it
as extras.
Yeah. It's so much. Well, this goes back to Mage: The Awakening as a rule system that I like, which I believe supports what the game is about.
Yeah.
It is complicated in some ways, and I do find that Fate makes it fairly interesting. But like the biggest challenge I've had is just because the Fate points drive the system, basically make aspects work. I feel like the entire game system basically boils down to spending Fate points to achieve things, and it's like the challenge there is like the way aspects work, especially like consequences, which are, you know, for the listener, aspects that you get when things happen to you, mainly like injuries or other stresses. Those are sort of, you both have to look at them as a mechanical feature and as a feature of the story, or else you're not really going to get the point. Like let's say somebody's in a fight with an ogre, and the ogre swings a club and hits them for a big whammy of damage, and they decide to take a consequence of a broken arm. Then thereafter, that broken arm is good for whenever the enemy wants to try to hurt them in their arm, they can gain a bonus to hit their arm.
Yeah.
But outside of the mechanics, then you have to just think like, well, your character also has a broken arm, so he's not going to be able to carry very much, and he's definitely not going to be able to use a weapon in that arm. Well, he's not going to be getting up that ladder very quickly because his arm is broken. It's going to be difficult to climb up that rope, that sort of thing. Stuff that, like, this is my conclusion came up when we were talking about Mage stuff, and just how there are a variety of different effects in the Mage magic system that are mechanically similar, but Mage offers a variety of complicated mechanics to support them. But it's like, how do you rationalize a high-level effect and a low-level effect, basically giving you the same thing, which is like an aspect and maybe a free compel on or a free tag on that aspect. And the way I think of it is like, well, you think of other story effects too. Like, let's say you're, I don't know, transforming your body into fire. In addition to the effects of that you might get from just increasing your strength, well, maybe fire is not going to burn you anymore. Maybe you can just start fires by touching things. You'll have that advantage. You just sort of, yeah, like there's a lot of intangibles that don't come up as numbers or points in the system that are obviously still there.
To play a bit of devil's advocate, I actually hope with those type of intangibles to maybe even get more out of a system. It kind of harkens back to what I was saying earlier. When you take like that, your new dot in your Arcanum, and you're like, holy crap, I can do aggravated damage now. That's awesome. That's really cool when you're like thinking about your character. But in play, bashing damage is more or less just as good for the most part. And so I would, you know, hope that adding the sort of story aspects to the power of things, the whole sort of idea that things just kind of do what they do, will be very effective. But I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, I that's my biggest. The fact that we've only really done this hybridized system, and we haven't really played a lot of generic Fate yet, it leads me to just kind of wonder, how exactly is it supposed to work? And then also, I'm eager to see how the Mage Fate system that you've developed, that is meant to basically work the way Fate works, how that will wind up working if we ever get around to using it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get around to it.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
And also,
There.
speaking of playing base Fate, Lee was throwing around running a Fate game. It would be sort of our first completely cherry popping complete Fate experience.
That is true. I've been, and I'll admit that I'm not a subtle man, but I played Bioshock Infinite, and it was like the coolest thing ever. And
An Electro Swing.
I've been listening to Electro Swing for years, and I don't know. I've been basically slowly but surely steeping myself in steampunk and that sort of thing. And it's like when Fate Core came out, and I was thinking about, because we haven't been able to play Ed's Pathfinder game for one reason or another, and people had mentioned, oh well, we want to fill this Monday, and I was like, man, I bet Fate would be perfect for a steampunk style game, just because it's a really like evocative phrase. Just the phrase steampunk, you know, it conjures to mind a lot of like interesting stuff, and I think that it would be good, it would be almost the perfect setting for me anyway, as like the first Fate thing. Like, it seems to fit so well.
That seems to me to be like a really good example of how Fate works and how a Fate game could get started. Just the idea of, hey, I want to run a steampunk Fate game, and it's like steampunk might mean different things to different people, but that doesn't matter. You get together, and the players and the GM make of it what they want, and by the time character creation is through, there's a game that everyone wants to play.
And it may not even necessarily be steampunk anymore, by the way.
Yeah, we might end up
be like a space western or a fairy tale. I don't know. It could be anything by the time we're done with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm pretty flexible most of the time. I like, part of the reason I want to run Fate is because I think it caters to my preference in GMing pretty strongly. That is to say, I like to ad lib a lot, and etc. And I don't know. I feel like it's a good, starting point, like a launching off point for Fate for our group.
Well, it should be really good for us though too, because if we're going to be doing a adapted Fate to Mage in the next time that Jeff wants to run a Mage campaign, this will be a really good platform for us to be
a learning experience,
right? And not only that, but
a dozen times
we've already been experiencing it even in this most recent Mage game. So this will really take us to that next level.
Sort of ease us into the Fate appropriately well.
And a lot of us will already know what we want to do different now that we didn't really take control of and make ours when we made our characters per se the first time around. A lot of it's going to make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's, I think, worth saying about Fate, is that it is so very conceptual that might be a barrier of entry.
Yeah, you definitely need to. You need a group of people who's willing to buy into the thing that you're making, and who aren't afraid to, speak up to make a game that they want to play. Like, it's so much a part of the process, and a part of like the long term, like everybody's investment in the setting and in the characters it's really important. And also it gives a lot for the GM to do. Like the character and game creation are so essential in giving the GM things to do, like more ways to hook into your character. Like, it's just you need a group of people who's willing to buy into that, I think.
I would definitely suggest, though, if your GM is not the sort of person who just specifically doesn't care what is going on as long as everybody is enjoying themselves, I would make sure you take cues from them as to what kind of game they want to run, and make sure that everybody is at least on board with the basic guidelines they're suggesting.
That's true. Your
Because-
GM is a player too.
Well, I'm saying, for instance, if Lee says he wants to run something with some steampunk jams, and we all insist that it has to be space western, there is a chance that he might not have fun. And when your GM doesn't have fun, guess what? Next week's game is canceled. Everybody go home.
We all insist that our home base is Culver's. And
Oh.
Yes. Then the GM gets upset and tells everyone to rent Firefly and stuff it up their asses.
It's funny because you guys think it's a space western, but really it's steampunk. So, welcome to the steampunk game.
Just mentioning one example of that makes me feel like we really aren't very good players, are we? We don't treat our GMs well.
Well, look at how Jeff turns out after every game.
But like,
Well,
they
I don't
put a
know.
lot in the book. You know, there's a lot of. I mean, and in any role playing game, there's a lot of responsibility on the GM. But like when I read the Fate book and when I look over this stuff, like the GM is a lot more of a player in this, I think, than they are in a lot of other games. Like
Yeah.
it feels like when I'm reading about it, I'm like, oh my god, you know, like that's cool stuff from a GM's perspective, and that's the sort of a feel I get when I'm a player.
Well,
You
and
know,
it
when I'm
takes a
reading
lot
about
of
it, that's so cool.
it takes a lot of responsibility off of the GM at the same time too, because they are no longer the sole person responsible for coming
Making
up with
things.
full universe, you know, and like the driving force behind so many things. Because now everybody's talking about it, you know, and
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
of course, it opens up other things that they're going to be responsible for,
It's-
but still,
It kind of comes out, I would say, almost symmetrically. Like you have all of these aspects on your character sheet, which basically represents way in which the GM can sort of shimmy in some of their stuff on what your character is doing, either inconveniencing him in the story or generally dictating what his aspects that he's inclined to do, and basically saying do it or else pay. And then conversely, the players are mostly at the beginning, but then throughout play also they're basically massaging some of what they want into the game world and into the plot. But still, the game is, you know, there is the GM has to have something to do.
Yeah.
And so you make sure that you leave them, you know, like some stuff to do, and not just to dictate everything that happens, or else they're gonna leave. They're gonna take their trucks and gonna go home, and nobody's gonna be playing anymore.
At the same time, I do think that that you could run a game like the system is flexible enough that if you took, say, I think they're doing something with Eclipse Phase also, and Eclipse Phase has this big, long, you know, like all of this history and this fluff
Who's doing
associated
what
with it.
Eclipse Phase?
I thought they were making an Eclipse Phase Fate thing. I thought that was like an official thing.
I don't believe you, but that sounds excellent.
Anyway, the thing is like you could, I think, if you had people who were willing to, you know, to buy into the existing lore for a game, you could take an existing setting or like a, you know, you could plug Fate into Forgotten Realms, I think, more or less, if you have people who were willing to, you know, to handwave some of the specifically finicky bits.
right? Can't change the world, can't change the cities that are already there.
Yeah, but you can
and even
plug your
change some of
characters
the
into it
most
in
famous
like,
people,
unique,
but
cool ways.
yeah,
And,
there's still
you know,
other ways to make a setting
I think you
in a
could-
setting.
Exactly. I think you could change things for a GM who wants to pour themselves into these history books that they're creating for a game. I think a GM could do that and still like have a satisfying experience. Or if they have, you know, a really specific idea for a setting, I still think they could get a lot out of it. They just have to change up the way character creation is done a little bit.
I'm sorry, I missed that whole last part because I immediately Googled Eclipse Phase Fate. We had that
Just had to
mentioned.
find
I hope
out.
I'm not lying. That's a thing,
Well, I
right?
did find. I'm not sure if it's official, but I did find at least one website that purports to have Eclipse Phase Fate rules.
One lonely man is out there, and he wants the world to know about it.
I agree. That does sound awesome, though.
It's possible there's more. Well, I'm just saying. I have to go on record as saying that I think that Eclipse Phase is one of those games that has an interesting and detailed rule system, which supports what the game is about.
That is
I
true.
don't know if I think that Fate would definitely improve that, but I do see some possibilities.
Yeah, I like the rules in Fate in Eclipse Phase personally. That
Oh yeah,
I like rules as well as I like non-rules.
they're a little bit nitty gritty in places,
I
but
would prefer generally to be the
Yeah.
player in a super rules heavy game than I would to be the GM. But you know, that's just
somebody's
me
got to
personally.
do it.
You know,
Um,
someone's got to be the burning wheel running guy, Ed.
Well,
No one else is willing to read all the rules.
as anecdotal evidence would support, no, I do not have to be that guy because I quit. I feel bad now.
It's still got to be you. No one else is going to run burning wheel.
Well,
or probably no one ever. That's probably for the better.
I'm
of
sure
humanity.
someone out there is playing it and they're digging it. All right, somebody
Yeah.
out there is playing it, and most of them are gritting their teeth, and one of them is really liking it.
One
you
of them
go.
is thinking of suicide.
No, I believe that people like it.
I had fun when we played it.
I mean, I enjoyed it. I think it would just be, you know, difficult to do long term.
Well, it's always going to boil down to the perspective of the player, anyways.
Yeah. But yeah, I think for my money, Fate is like the more I read it, the more I think, man, I should have been running every game I've ever run in Fate because I think that just works for me personally. Like the way that it works, the the emphasis. Like when I read it, I see an emphasis on winging it one way or another, or at least a reward
Impulse.
for it. Yeah.
Creativity.
And, like for me, like that's the sort of game I want to run. So I'm pumped to run something in it, and I should probably put a little bit more effort into actually getting people together for that. Which I haven't been. I've just been thinking about it all the time and reading the book. But yeah, you know, I wanna do that. I wanna share it with my friends and with the internet.
Yeah, and so I guess this is more of a first read, sort of talking about this, but we're going to be doing at least a couple games in Fate Core, and we'll of course stream them and keep y'all posted.
Yeah, we have detailed records now of basically every game we've run for a couple years.
So it's good to be podcasting again, and we'll try to come up with these regularly now. And
I call it semi-regularly.
all right.
Yeah.
All right.
Good. So I think we're going to be taking off.
What I do think we should do, and this is just something to look forward to for those of you, is we should have a chat about it after we do the actual first session.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh
Get
yeah.
like people's.
Do you want to roll right into
input.
one right after the first session?
Maybe.
Why not?
It's hard to say.
Hey, if we could time that, that would be really fresh and awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's look forward to that or something like it.
yeah, look forward to that. Visit the website,
Houserule.com.
houserule.com. Read the blogs. Rory and Richard are both putting up blogs for some games they're running locally. They're pretty cool. So yeah,
It's been swell.
check that out. All right, later.
Bye.
Peace.
Peace.